If you walk the neon-soaked streets of modern Tokyo, you are immediately struck by how connected it all is. Millions of visitors flock here every year, drawn to a high-tech, deeply globalized society that seems perfectly tuned to the outside world. But this welcoming, open-door reality is actually a historical anomaly. For well over 2 centuries, stepping foot on these islands, or trying to leave them, was a crime punishable by death. This era was known as Sakoku, or closed country. An entire, thriving nation intentionally severed its ties with the rest of the planet, essentially walling itself off from human history. This chart is a timeline of Japan's contact with the outside world. Look at this massive 268-year gap. How does a society that completely locks itself in the dark suddenly emerge as one of the most hyper-advanced, integrated countries on Earth? To see how, we have to zoom out. This ultra-modernity grew from a survival cycle nearly 2,000 years old. Japan aggressively absorbs foreign ideas, then violently slams the door shut to forge them into something entirely new. Our timeline begins with a massive influx of foreign ideas. Starting in the 6th century, early Japanese leaders looked across the water to mainland Asia. They imported Buddhism, adopted advanced agriculture, and carefully copied the Chinese imperial system to build a centralized ruin port in Kyoto. Over the next few hundred years, that imported court grew comfortable. The elites focused entirely on the poetry and internal politics of the capital, completely ignoring the governance of the provinces outside their walls. Without a strong central authority, control over the rural land slipped out of the emperor's hands. Regional noble elites stepped into the vacuum, backed by the might of their own samurai warriors. The court's total collapse plunged the island into a chaotic, decentralized feudal system. Local warlords, known as daimyo, carved the nation into smaller independent states, kicking off a brutally violent era of open civil war. This breakdown of the old imported system trapped Japan in centuries of endless internal conflict. But that constant, bloody competition created a society desperate for a tactical edge, perfectly setting the stage for a piece of technology that would upend the island. In 1543, a Portuguese trading vessel was blown off course and washed up on a southern Japanese island. On board were 3 merchants and a powerful new weapon, completely unknown to the entire archipelago: the European musket. The feuding daimyo instantly recognized the sheer power of gunpowder. Within a little over a decade, they had reverse-engineered the Portuguese guns and were deploying hundreds of thousands of firearms across their battlefields. Those who mastered the new weaponry dominated. Through a series of rapid, gun-cover-fueled campaigns, a handful of military geniuses conquered their rivals, culminating in the complete unification of Japan under the Tokugawa shogunate in 1600. But having used foreign technology to win control, the new shoguns realized those same foreign elements, especially weapons and Western religion, could easily be used to overthrow them. So they decided to pull up the drawbridge. In 1639, the government enacted strict punitive measures. They outlawed Christianity, banned citizens from traveling abroad, and expelled all foreigners, save for a tiny, heavily guarded Dutch trading post on an artificial island. For the next 268 years, peace held. The population doubled, and a uniquely Japanese culture flourished without outside interference. But while the island prospered in isolation, the rest of the world was undergoing an industrial revolution, building engines and empires that Japan couldn't even see. That illusion of safety shattered in 1853, when a fleet of heavily armed American steamships sailed straight into Tokyo Bay. The U.S. demanded open trade, and they had the cannons to back it up. The Tokugawa shogunate was completely outgunned. Their 2 centuries of peace meant they had largely missed out on global military advancements, leaving them entirely defenseless against Western industrial firepower. Recognizing the existential threat, a faction of southern provinces launched a coup. They toppled the shogun, restored the emperor to power, and triggered the Meiji Restoration, a frantic, society-wide race to catch up with the West. The historical pendulum swung forcefully outward once again. The new government hired hundreds of foreign experts, importing telegraph lines, building railway networks, modern banking systems, and crucially, modern military tactics to build a professional standing army. Once Japan secured its borders, it looked outward. Mimicking the colonial empires of Europe, they used this newly modernized force to rapidly conquer territory, stunning the world by defeating the massive militaries of China and Russia. But this aggressive land grab across the Asia-Pacific triggered severe economic sanctions from the international community. Desperate for resources to sustain their military machine, Japan's leaders set themselves on a devastating collision course with the United States. The attempt to survive by becoming a violent, expansionist empire ended in total destruction. Following a brutal Pacific conflict and the catastrophic dropping of 2 atomic bombs, the nation's military ambitions were turned to ash. By the end of 1945, Japan was at absolute zero. The country was occupied by Allied forces, fully stripped of its military capabilities, and its emperor was forced to publicly renounce his divine status. Yet the structural adaptability that defined Japanese history remained intact. Prevented from fielding an army, the Japanese people channeled that intense energy away from conquest and squarely into rapid socio-economic development. The recovery was staggering. Within a decade, the economy pushed past pre-war levels, and the country applied a fierce work ethic to master global industries, taking an absolute commanding lead in automobile manufacturing. They simultaneously took over the consumer electronics space, flooding the international market with high-quality goods. By 1968, this relentless focus had built the second-largest capitalist economy on the planet. The thriving, neon-lit landscape of today represents the ultimate refinement of that ancient strategy. By constantly pulling in global innovations and reshaping them through a cultural lens, Japan built a society that remains uniquely, undeniably their own.